Hello, my lovelies, and welcome to Where the Road Rises, Law, Lessons, Legacy, with me, your host, Eileen Curlin-Walsh. Today, we welcome to Channel 4 the force of nature that is Donna Miller, Cook County Commissioner for the county's 6th District, a prestigious and demanding position. Donna, as a reminder, if it's been a while since you've had a civics lesson, the county is our third layer of government here in Illinois. Our first tier is, of course, federal law. Second tier is state law, county third, and the fourth tier is our local municipal law. The Cook County Commissioner, in addition to ensuring the county is adhering to federal and state law, is the legislative body that creates county law. Donna is well qualified. She's been involved with community, civic, and political activities her entire life. She has a long history of serving as a mentor and a role model to youth struggling to realize a bright future, and she is an advocate for underserved communities. And we are honored to have Donna share her stories, her experience, her wisdom and advice with us today. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you so much, Eileen. It's great being here with you today.
Well, thank you. Why don't we get started with your childhood? How did you grow up? What was the cultural, political landscape like? What are some of your earliest memories?
Well, I grew up in a military family. So my father was in the Army, and my mother was a school teacher. And we always had vibrant conversations in our house with relatives, grandparents, great-grandparents. I was fortunate enough to grow up with my great-grandparents as well. And being a military brat, I mean, that's what they're called, and especially in the Army, we moved around a lot, but then my parents got divorced, and then my mother and my sisters and I, we moved to Chicago, where my mother is from. Okay. So I lived here from 5th grade on, but still close to my father, obviously, and visited him all the time. And some of my early memories are being a teenager, growing up with a father. My father was a lieutenant colonel in the Army when I was a teenager. So, you know, no one was good enough to talk to me or to come to the house, and my father was very strict in that way. And now I kind of laugh about it because I think we have great phone etiquette, because I couldn't even answer the phone by saying hello. It was, hello, good afternoon. This is Donna speaking, and this is Colonel Black's house. Oh my maiden name was Black. So that's how we had to answer the phone. So I think that, you know, kind of regimen kind of taught, like, how you do things that are politically correct, or how you kind of have some sort of ritual, you know, whether it's in your house or outside of your house. So I don't mind it, and I also feel that growing up in the military lets you make new friends, because you're always moving around and you're always meeting new people, and everyone's very friendly. So I think that that helped me get that kind of, you know, ability to meet new people, find out what's important to them, and be their friend.
Yeah, a foundation for where you were going to go. And it sounds like maybe your parents, your grandparents were mentors. Did they give you that sense of self-worth and entitlement that gave you the springboard for the future you were going to be qualified for?
Absolutely. So, I mean, my grandfather was in the military too. My other grandfather was a physician in Chicago. Everyone was well established in their careers, but always gave back. And that was part of anything in our household, that we knew that it wasn't just for us, it was for other people as well. Whatever we were doing, whether it was from a healthcare standpoint, a military standpoint, giving service to our country. My stepmother worked for the Red Cross and was a Red Cross station manager, and spent a lot of time going to other countries doing that job. So I just learned a lot about service, and being part of a community means you give back to a community. And even having a mom as a teacher. I mean, this was early on. My mom was a teacher in the beginning of the 80s when things were kind of changing in public school. And my mom would bring her frying pan to school and make breakfast every day for all of her students, because she's like, you know, some of my students don't even eat breakfast, which we couldn't imagine, you know, like, how could you go out of the house and not eat breakfast? But so she would provide breakfast for them, and that's illegal now. I mean, you can't do that.
It's
a teacher can't do that.
Image. It's such a powerful image.
Yeah.
Walking into school with the pan ready to cook the breakfast.
Yeah.
And food insecurity is just always an ongoing issue with us. But before we talk about political issues, let's talk a little about the journey then from that childhood, that teenagehood, all the way to becoming Cook County Commissioner. So tell us a little bit about that meandering path.
It was, yes. So I would say it wasn't something I set out to do, to go down this path. It kind of evolved. Sometimes they say the path chooses you. So the path did choose me. And I would say that started early on. Even so, my stepmother, like I said, worked for the Red Cross. I was a Red Cross volunteer in the hospital in high school. Had a little uniform. I thought I was, super cute. So that was out, but actually that was a way of giving back. Then I went to college in Washington, D.C. I went to Howard University, and I interned on Capitol Hill for 2 years, and with a Senator Alan Dixon, who's from Illinois. So I loved that. I loved the whole being on the Capitol Hill. I wanted to be a person involved in policy. So I always thought I would be a behind-the-scenes person, working on policy for a senator or a congressional person. And I did get a job offer to do that coming out of college, and just realized the pay wasn't that much. My parents helped me realize that that they could no longer support me. So if that's the money I was going to make, that was going to be about it. And they were like, yeah, you can't really get a car and an apartment on that salary. I was like, really? Oh, what am I going to do? They were like, you're going to find a different job. So that's what happened. And but I always stayed close to it. I even teased when I had the pleasure of seeing our President Joe Biden come to Chicago one time. I said, I worked on your first presidential campaign, the one he suspended. But I was in college at the time, went to Delaware, knocked on doors, and worked on that. So I've always been behind the scenes throughout my entire life. My grandfather had a public office in the state of Pennsylvania where he was Secretary of Aging, the very first Secretary of Aging in the state of Pennsylvania. So that was innovative. So I've just been surrounded by innovative people, not only in my family, but outside of my family. And that kind of led me down this path to say, I want to be of service in some way. And if it's volunteering, that's what I've done. But then when the chance came to run for office, that's what I did. So I know we'll get into that.
Yeah, so what was the turning point between being behind the scenes and jumping right out front and running for office?
I think it was, so I was involved with a lot of different groups, a lot of women groups especially, focused on getting women to run for office. And I was in these meetings and we're talking about what offices are available, who we could recruit for certain positions. And they were like, well, we need someone like this, all these characteristics. And I was like, well, that kind of sounds like me. I mean, I think it sounds like me. And they were like, well, it does. It is you, but you don't want to do that, do you? And I'm like, I think I do. So that's kind of how it happened, where I just realized they're talking, we are talking about someone like me, and why shouldn't it be me? Right. But in the political world, they know that women have to be asked to run for office. And women don't typically think it should be me. And that happens to almost every woman who is in office now will tell you, somebody else told me it should be me. It wasn't me telling myself it should be me.
Yeah, and that leads right to my next question, Donna, which is, I am sure you have faced adversity. I'm sure it wasn't a rose-strewn pathway. I'm sure you've faced adversity, maybe sexism, racism on that journey. And how did you handle that, and how did you grow from it?
It's really been an interesting journey. So I'll just say, going back, so I spent the majority of my career in the pharmaceutical industry. So for over 20 years, that's the industry that I've worked in. And in that industry, it's very heavily women on the top. There's a lot of women in that industry that came to be over time. So I wasn't accustomed to being like the only woman in a room. I wouldn't say, I wasn't accustomed to it, but it happened. And certainly wasn't the only African American in the room. That happened a lot as well. So when I came to this, being in the political world where people are a little bit more sexist and don't hide it like they do in corporate America, I was like, what are they talking about? I mean, so one example was, if I could just give a quick story. So my husband was in politics. So that's why, so the other part of the journey is I ended up marrying, he always tells me he's not a politician. I married a dentist who became a politician. When he became a politician, I had the wife role of a political wife, right? So one day I was out meeting him for lunch. He was doing an interview sort of like this. And I just said, oh, I happen to be downtown. You're downtown. So I came there. And when I get there, some of the guys who were there, they were like, oh, it's so nice you could meet him for lunch. Were you out shopping? And I was like, no, actually I was at my job working. Then I had a minute to come in between for lunch. And I'm just looking at my husband like, shopping? I mean, I like to shop, but that's not my day. So just those little nuances, I never heard that in corporate America where I worked, because you were always respected as a woman leader, someone who did the job, not wondering, did your husband say it was okay for you to come over here today? Or did you get permission from your husband? I mean, I've heard these things in the last 20 years of living this life of being a political wife and being in politics. And then when you have kids, they add a whole nother layer onto the conversation. Like, how could you possibly be a good mom and be in a role like this? Because you're so busy. You're so busy. You don't have time for this.
That is the question. That is the sort of really the ghost that haunts us all. If you want to have it all, the wonderful career, you want to be successful in business, if you want to be in high office, and you want to be a good mom. And I have to admit that this does not happen to men. They're not questioned about their fatherhood if they run for high office.
Not at all.
So you've dealt with adversity and you've balanced all of these roles, and you've done a fine job of it, Donna. So what is your superpower? What gets you through?
I would say just, leaning on, I always say, all of the people who shaped me are still with me. So my ancestors, my grandparents, everything they taught me is in me. So my sister and I joke all the time. We're like, well, we just know that because it's in our DNA. So I would say, I say my superpower is just being able to lean on what I knew from before, from other family members or other people who inspired me, and taking it and just remembering that's who I am.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, Donna. So tell us about the work that you have done for the poor, the disenfranchised. You've had initiatives for those with HIV/AIDS. You have worked with the sickle cell anemia community. Tell us about that work and how that community outreach has touched you, and how do you feel about us now as a human race, the human condition, by your work with those communities?
Well, all of those communities had powerful advocacy, each one. And I would say that what really makes a difference for people is the people who get behind an issue. So in HIV, I was in the beginning of HIV, before it was even a big conversation. And I say in the beginning based off of the work at the pharmaceutical company I worked for. And having those conversations were all about educating people. What is this? How do we deal with it? Who gets it? So all of it was really about educating, but going into communities that were afraid of the conversation. And that happened, so we see that even happening now with COVID. But so in the beginning of HIV, it was making sure people got tested. That sounds familiar, right? Mm-hmm. Making sure people knew what they could do to combat it, or getting communities behind it. So there's a lot of support groups. Same thing with the sickle cell community. This happens to be Sickle Cell Awareness Month, which is in the month of September. We just conducted a blood drive to help raise awareness for the African American community to not only know if they have sickle cell disease or sickle cell trait, but to be blood donors, because that's so crucial. So I learned that years ago from working with the Red Cross. So continuing those kind of partnerships, it's really important. Then I also worked in the cystic fibrosis community, which is another genetic disease. So sickle cell, cystic fibrosis are both genetic diseases. And one of the most powerful things I saw from working in the cystic fibrosis community, again, the power of advocacy. So they have a foundation, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. They worked tirelessly to try to get a cure. And that was just from a few people thinking, we can combat this, we can do something about it. It took years, but there was a long-range plan. Mm-hmm. They implemented the plan, they raised the money, they created advocates throughout the country. And it took time, and at one time, that cystic fibrosis was not even on the newborn screening panel for the state of Illinois. And now it is, and that was from grassroots advocates who made that happen, and now it's across the entire country. But I just learned from all of that it takes a squeaky wheel. It takes someone to say, how come we can't do this? So when they told the cystic fibrosis community, we're not gonna have a cure, there's not much we can do, they said, why not? They didn't say okay. And I think that happened in every one of those instances, HIV, sickle cell, we still have a lot to do in sickle cell, but the raising the awareness is what's key throughout all of those.
I think that's a great lesson for all of us, and a very old story, the squeaky wheel, but it still works. So Donna, tell us about a typical day, week, year as a Cook County Commissioner. I was shocked when I was researching your position how much the Commission does. So what does your job look like on a daily basis?
No 2 days are the same, so I will say that. And I think on a daily basis, you have to focus on what is your purpose for being on the county board. There's 17 commissioners on the Cook County Board. And I will say the good thing is that each one of us has our own kind of unique niches that we want to fall in. So mine is healthcare. So because I came from the healthcare background, being in this industry, which proved to be very important now as we look at what's going on with COVID-19. So on a daily basis, I'm looking at that as first thing. I also ran to make sure that I was having conversations and implementing changes for property tax reform, just because of the area that we live in the south and southwest suburbs. And also economic development. So on a daily basis, those are my three main focuses. Everything kind of envelops around that.
And how does your background, who you are as a person, what your experiences is, everything that you brought to the position, how does that affect your perspective on what you do?
It gives me a good perspective on what's being done on a county level, because I think it shows how the collective whole of all one group, whether it be Cook County or just people individually, can make an important impact. So Cook County is the second largest county in the whole country. So when you think about whatever happens here has long effects across the entire country, because we're setting a precedent and we're making either something good better or something that doesn't exist.
Right. And what about the committees that you sit on? Tell us a little bit about those.
So the committees that I sit on, so I'm vice chair for workforce development, and that's an important committee right now, especially as we're looking at people redefine their future, just because of what's been happening with the economic downturn, people having traditional jobs that are no longer traditional. How do we make sure that people are not just looking for a job, but they're looking for a career and a future doing something? And there's a lot of these somethings that aren't typical. So even those of us who have kids, our kids might come and say, I'm going to work in this, Amazon or what have you. Amazons are big out here. We're not accustomed to that. We don't know the types of jobs that might be available for you to have a good career, long-lasting career with Amazon, but they are on the beginning of what that change is going to be. I think the other committee, so I'm on contract compliance as well, so that's an important committee because we want to get more diversity for businesses in Cook County. We want to make sure that businesses are minority, women, or business economically certified MWBEs. We want to make sure that they are the ones doing business with the county. So that's been an important charge of mine too, to make sure that we're always looking for those businesses that meet that criteria. And then I also mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned the Veterans Committee. So that's very important to me, coming from a military background, making sure that those resources that are out there for veterans, especially on the county level, that they get taken advantage of in the right way. And there's lots of resources that many veterans don't even know exist.
Yeah. that's such an important cause. Let me just go right back to the employment and where we're at right now. My niece is 16 and she was staying with me from Ireland for the summer, and she said, how come every store has a help wanted sign? So like from the mouths of a teenager. So it is a little hard to understand how we might still have unemployment numbers, that we have so many unfilled vacancies. Is this all coming out of the pandemic, and or is it a trend? What does it mean?
I think it's a trend in certain areas, and a lot of it is because of the pandemic. So a lot of businesses had to shut down or repurpose themselves, figure out a new way to go, and that took a little bit of, time to maneuver. But then a lot of these businesses that are like food service businesses, fast food restaurants, grocery stores, gas stations, there is a not enough employees to fill these jobs right now. And so we need to get people, and that's why we're really focused on making sure they're not looking at it as a job. So if you go work at a gas station, is that the only thing you could do for that company? The gas station is a huge company, right? Probably owned by some Exxon or what have you. So are there other things that you could look to do if you just worked at the gas station? And they're not teaching people how to look at it that way. And I think that might be a missing link, especially as we see huge numbers of vacancies at these positions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to understand, and I've certainly heard it discussed that people are rethinking their roles, rethinking how many hours they worked in food service. But if we don't go back to the job we had before shelter in place, what is the new direction? It looks like we're all up for a reckoning, and society might have to rethink many things as we hopefully come out of our current health crisis. Donna, what about the dark side of high office? How do you keep your inner candle burning when people are bitter and cynical about the office, when we hear about scandals, when people say they don't trust any official, any politician? How do you keep going and stay true to yourself, and how do you not become cynical?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you can, but I think it helps to always look at the bright side, because every day something bad happens, something good happens too. So, and being surrounded by positive people. I mean, look, I'm so happy I met you. You're just a ray of sunshine. And so days like this make it like, okay, well, someone said something bad yesterday. You can just forget that and move on. But you just have to be internally focused on what your goals are, and always keep those in front, and surround yourself with people who want to help you make those goals happen. And there's a lot of those people. There's a lot of those people like who want to help, and every day I meet someone who's like, oh, I just want to help do this. We were just this morning at the Greater Food Depository seeing all these volunteers helping, making sure people don't have food insecurity. So when you see something like that, we met a woman today who's been doing this for 40 years. So when you see something like that, you're like, I can't have a bad day. I can't be, I call it a pity party. So sometimes I do get upset and have my pity party. I'm like, okay, 5-minute pity party. And then that's it. Then you have to just let it go.
And they say what we focus on expands. We see what we want to see, so you can focus on the bitterness, the darkness, so you can focus on the light and all the good. I say this about my profession too. I'm an estate planning attorney. Yes, do we see fights? Yes, do we see sometimes difficult things? But far, far more often I see generosity and love and giving, and I choose to see that, and therefore you do see it, and you can see it everywhere. I love that, Donna. So what's your greatest takeaway then from the life you've lived, being in business, being in the pharmaceutical industry, and now being a politician? What's your greatest takeaway? What would you say you've learned the most from your life to date?
I always say that, if you have passion for something, it comes through, no matter what you do. And I got that advice from my first professor from college when I had my first job and I didn't like it. And she's like, well, you have to find something in the job you like. I'm like, well, that sounds so simple, but it applies to all of this. You just have to find something that you're good at and make it better, or you can expand on it, or you can share it with other people. So I always say that, having passion and being passionate about whatever it is you're doing, it comes through, but it also builds on things. So I'm passionate, I guess, about healthcare. So that's why I had that career, and that's why I can take that to my experience on the county board. I'm passionate about making sure that, people have advocacy for the issues they care about. That. And I can teach people that and share that kind of information with people as a commissioner. That if you think something's important, you're probably not the only one. You can make it something that we can legislate.
And that may very well lead to my next question, which was, as your role as a role model and a mentor, which you do for young women, for teenagers, and how do you wear that mantle? Is it a lot of responsibility? Do you find it easy? Do you let your life serve as the example of, what working hard and working ethically and going forward with passion in the direction of your dreams can take you?
I mean, yeah. Well, so I'm a mom of 2 boys. So my boys always say I would be a better girl mom. Because they're like, girls just love you, they just want to talk to you. And I'm like, well, it's different because boys have different things they want to talk about, I think. But I think that being able to be a mentor or inspire anyone is just a blessing to me, such a gift. And sometimes I'm like, oh, they want to hear from me. But there's things that I feel that people can take, and I want them to be better than me, whoever wants to listen to me. I want them to take whatever I have and expand on it. Oh. And I always tell every group that I talk to, I'm like, I will talk to anybody if you call me, and you'd be surprised how many people don't call you. So when they do call, I've taken girls to lunch, I've taken them to events with me because they called me. They're like, I don't know what I want to do, but could I just hang out with you? I'm like, sure, come hang out with me. See a county board meeting. It's awesomely exciting. But those are the kind of people I think you should give them a chance, and you don't know what's going to happen. So one of the young women I met at a public policy class in her grad school, when she graduated, she called me to thank me because I talked to her about public policy. And I was like, yes, you're in a great career. This is something that you can do something big with or do your own business with. Lots of things around policy. But she said no one had ever told her something like that before.
I love the fact that just because they reached out, how many people feel that they would get a call back or wouldn't even have the confidence or the sense of entitlement to reach out in the first place. So that may be the very first gift you give them there. If you call me, we will respond.
Oh, yeah.
Because a lot of especially young girls who don't come from a background where they've been encouraged or had a lot of opportunities, that's probably enlightening.
Yes, I love it.
So what are you most proud of now as you look back on your life to date? And I'm sure you have a lot of unfinished business still to do, but for the life you've lived to date.
Let's see, what am I most proud of? It's a combination of things. So one, I'm most proud of my boys. So I just sent my first son to college, so I'm happy about that. So mission accomplished almost. But I'm also proud that they can see some of the work that I feel is important. They can take that to that next generation. And I think that's what it's all about. I feel that a lot of these kids are so much smarter than their parents and just know so much. They're so worldly, they're so compassionate, they care about issues, and that makes me feel like the future is going to be in good hands because of them. And I'm excited to see them want to maybe consider a career in politics or in law or in healthcare because they want to help people. And I've heard so many young people that I've talked to recently say exactly that. Like, I want to start a business that helps people in underserved areas. Or I want to be a doctor so that I can help kids who might be going blind. I just met this young girl who told me that the other day. I'm like, wow, these kids are like on fire and they just know what they want to do, but they want to give back. So
you're optimistic for our future. I love that. And you really do get to see on a very granular level what's going on in the county. As you say, one of the largest counties in the whole country, and you're optimistic for our future. That's great. I think that's probably the best way to end our show. Or maybe you could give us a little nugget of wisdom, a favorite quote or biblical passage. Well, a poem you love?
I wish I could memorize an entire poem, but but one of the things, I would send my boys little quotes, not every day, but a lot. And so one of the ones, and I just reminded my son of that the other day, who's at college, you know, if you believe it, you can achieve it. And it's just so simple, but if you are negative and you don't believe something, it's going to be hard to do because you don't believe it. How are you going to make other people believe in you?
Yeah. If you believe you can, you're right. If you believe you cannot, you're right. Yeah. Donna, thank you so much. That was wonderful. I've enjoyed talking to you. And viewers, Donna has a very active Facebook page. She posts just about every day what's going on in the community. She has a website, so you can learn more about Donna on both those platforms. And thank you for watching, and we will see you again next time on Where the Road Rises. Thanks, and bye.